Man's Folly is a 1986 made-for-television film directed by Clive Donner and stars Peter Ustinov in his fourth movie as Hercule Poirot. In this one, Poirot and Hastings are invited to attend a murder hunt organized by mystery novelist Ariadne Oliver. But when the girl playing the dead body for the game ends up murdered for real, Poirot is on the case, determined to solve what happened. As I found with the previous film in this series, this one was a fun, fairly lighthearted mystery as well. It opens with a brief scene set in one of the food halls at Harrods in London. So that was a neat bit of location shooting, getting to see what that story looked like in the 1980s. It's there that Poirot meets Ariadne Oliver, who apparently he was acquainted with, and she asks him to attend this game that she's in charge of. That scene sets up their relationship that becomes a bit of a running gag throughout the film, which I'll get to later. I like the idea of a murder hunt, which is basically a larger scale version of a murder mystery dinner party, being the setting where a real murder takes place. Unfortunately, they dropped that motif pretty quickly, especially since no one, Poirot included, is very interested in participating in the game, which made me wonder why he even accepted the invitation in the first place. Right from the beginning, Poirot seems bored with it all, which was too bad. I think there could have been some fun scenes watching the whole group of players working their way through the clues and then having a true master detective show them up at every turn. But alas, it was not to be. Thankfully, we get lots of other great moments yet again with Peter Ustinov. This film gave me the impression that the director likely just let Peter Ustinov do whatever he wanted during his scenes. I would assume there's a degree of that in all of his Poirot films, but this one really had me noticing it. So many times he's mumbling little asides to Hastings, or repeating bits of dialogue almost to himself, or just mugging for the camera in the background. And none of this is a complaint. It's all very entertaining and constantly keeps the movie fresh and lively. But at the same time, I think you can feel his interpretation of the character straying further from his literary counterpart in each successive film. Whereas David Suchet's series was titled Agatha Christie's Poirot, this series of films could be subtitled Peter Ustinov's Poirot. And that's totally fine. I don't think every version of a literary character, especially when it's been adapted and portrayed so many times, needs to match the source material exactly. As long as it fits the film or series, gives you the essence of him, and doesn't completely change the character, I think that's fine. Us fans just get a variety of versions to examine and enjoy. But back to this film. He gets a couple of very funny moments where he has to run downhill. The first is just hilarious to watch, followed by his trying to communicate with Hastings, who's located back up the hill and from a window in the manor house where they're staying at. And when Poirot is discovered by someone walking the grounds, he quickly feigns doing his evening exercise out on the lawn. I don't know if there's a name for this, but I'll call it out-of-breath acting. And when he tries to speak to this woman, he can barely get the words out, and the whole thing is just one of the film's highlights. He also gets a couple of more serious moments, where you see Poirot filled with rage at one of the suspects and reprimanding them. I'm not sure we've seen that side of Peter Ustinov's Poirot before. I enjoy that aspect of the character, where he is personally offended by the attitude or response that he's receiving from someone, and dresses them down very quickly. David Suchet, I think, could be quite masterful at those type of scenes, so it was interesting seeing another take on that. I enjoyed Jonathan Cecil's Hastings much more this time around. He isn't portrayed as nearly as much of an idiot, frankly, or a goofball like last time, which is nice. Poirot is still quite dismissive of him, and I prefer seeing them as friends, but these two actors just don't have that type of dynamic. They do get several nice scenes together, though, one in which Hastings is laying out his theory of what happened, and becomes quite indignant at Poirot's brushing it off as the amateur detective work that it is. In that moment, he did remind me of Hugh Fraser's Hastings, as he often would be taken aback at Poirot's condescending manner when discussing a case. Jean Stapleton plays Ariadne Oliver, and I wasn't a fan of the character, but I think her performance was fairly good. The character is intended to be something of an irritating busybody, and she fulfills that and then some, with always trying to get in on the interrogations and the investigation in general, just in case she could turn this into another book. We get a great moment where, as seemingly everyone in the house is coming around the corner, they see her waiting on the staircase and quickly dart out of sight to avoid being stuck talking to her. There is a running joke where she has given a copy of her newest mystery to Poirot, entitled Hatchet's Blood and a Parakeet, and he is continually trying to accidentally leave it at the breakfast table or in another room, and each time she brings it back to him, making sure he doesn't lose it. Now, the most obvious solution would be to leave the book in your room and then just don't pack it when you leave, but apparently the screenwriter thought this joke was just too good to pass up. Speaking of which, the film was written again by Rod Browning. I think it's on a similar level as the 13 at Dinner script, but maybe not quite as snappily written. But continuing on with the cast, Kenneth Cranham plays Detective Inspector Bland. Whether that name is a reference to his personality, I'm not sure, but anyway, I enjoyed the character. Rather than being a local police inspector being annoyed at a meddling non-police detective, Bland is basically a fan of Poirot's. We're told they worked together during the ABC murders, and after the apparent brilliance Poirot displayed during that case, Bland is more than happy to turn the investigation over to Poirot. He isn't involved in the movie much as a whole, but he gets a few good scenes. My favorite is Poirot launching into another round of questions and then quickly remembering he isn't officially in charge of this case, and he and Bland go back and forth trying to politely determine who should speak next. For the rest of the cast, there aren't any huge names. Tim Pigott-Smith was quite good as the rich man who owns the manor house where the murder takes place. Constance Cummings is an elderly woman who lives on the grounds, and her performance was so understated and realistic amongst some more comical characters around her, so I appreciated her quite a bit. Caroline Langrish is another guest at the manor, and she too actually was very natural and interesting to watch. She has a nice scene with Poirot at the Folly of the title, where he gets another of his patented giving wise advice to a young woman scenes. Ustinov is always great with those, as we've seen similar scenes in Death on the Nile and Evil Under the Sun, and it shows his compassionate side, although in this one he's obviously using the conversation to glean more information about a possible suspect. There are also a handful of actors who are quite bad in this. Nicolette Sheridan in particular as the lady of the house, Hattie Stubbs. She delivers all of her dialogue in a very high, unnatural sounding voice and stuck out every time. Ralph Arliss as the usual ladies' man type was pretty weak as well, as was Christopher Guard as the husband of Caroline Langrish's character. Although, with him, it was hard to tell how his performance was under the giant mullet that he's sporting. Which brings me to one issue I have with the movie. Like last time, the story is set in the 80s, which I still am okay with, but the 80s fashion and hairstyles this time were borderline out of control. Especially some of the men's haircuts are just ridiculous. There may have been some of that in 13 at Dinner, but I feel like it stuck out much more this time. Seeing Poirot questioning a man with huge feathered out hair and a baggy blazer looking like an extra from Miami Vice is an odd visual, but what can you do? Other than that, the look of the film is very good. It's all very colorful, in particular the huge stretches of green lawn on the estate. Pretty much the whole movie is set there, other than the opening at Harrods and one scene back at Poirot's flat in London. I believe it was filmed almost entirely at West Wycombe Park, and there is a great variety to the locations used inside and outside the house. The occasion of this murder hunt is an annual fair that the public can also attend behind the house, and the tents and attractions that are set up are also a unique setting for a Poirot story. The score was again composed by John Addison, returning after 13 at Dinner, and I enjoyed the music very much again. He brings back the main theme that he established last time and adds some nice sections to it when transitioning to the opening scene and scenes later on as well. I always like seeing how a new director might take on and freshen up the murder mystery genre, and one thing that stood out to me was how at the beginning, when Poirot and Hastings arrive, Miss Oliver lists all of the characters and some helpful facts about them. This reminded me of those cast of character lists at the beginning of Agatha Christie novels, where you have that to refer back to, if necessary, when a character reappears later during the book. While normally this might seem like a lazy way of establishing all of your suspects, I liked it as a nod to reading the novel. An odd thing, though, was how, after the murder happens, the investigators seem to almost forget about it, and instead focus on trying to find Lady Stubbs, who has gone missing around the same time. It felt a little strange to me, but of course all these seemingly random events are tied together. The resolution to the mystery is a little convoluted, and I don't think you'd be able to put it all together based on what we were presented with. There are some key bits of information that Hastings has to retrieve and are only revealed at the end. So how could we know? I don't really mind that. I'm not usually one to try and solve the mystery before the movie wants it solved. I much prefer just letting the movie take me down whatever path it wants and mislead me if possible. I enjoy the surprise. So, while this movie is by no means perfect and did feel like a bit of a step down since last time, it's still a must-watch for Poirot and Ustinov fans. It's a brisk hour and a half, and again, very lively. I'd recommend it. Thanks so much for watching this review. If you liked it, please consider checking out some of my other reviews at Hildebrand Productions. Adios for now.